In this video, we'll show you how to change the lower control arm on your Chevy Silverado. You can find it on CarParts.com via the link in the description. For safety reasons, we strongly suggest watching our video on how to jack your Chevy Silverado safely. Ask another person to press the brake pedal. Use a ratchet and a 36mm socket to unblock the nut on the end of the CV axle. Then, use a fork to unclip all the clips that hold the ABS sensor cable in place. You can also use a screwdriver to help you. Disconnect the connector by pushing on the red plastic tab, then prying the tab and pulling it. Shift the ABS sensor cable. Using a multi-bit screwdriver and a 10mm socket, unscrew the bolt securing the brake hose bracket. Then move the brake hose aside. You must then disengage the upper control arm ball joint from the wheel knuckle. Brush the upper control arm ball joint retainer nut and spray it with penetrating oil. Release the ball joint with a 17mm wrench. Use a hammer to strike the knuckle. The ball joint should come out of the knuckle. Finish unscrewing the nut. Then, remove the upper control arm ball joint from the wheel knuckle. If necessary, pry with a crowbar to facilitate handling. To be able to replace the lower control arms on your vehicle, you need to remove the struts. Brush off the bolts of the strut foot and spray them with penetrating oil. Using a ratchet and a 16mm socket, unscrew the two strut foot retaining bolts. Now you need to unscrew the 3 nuts on the upper strut mount. Using a fork, unclip all the wiring harness clips on the upper strut mount retaining nuts. Brush the 3 nuts holding the strut mount bearing and spray them with penetrating oil. Then, from the engine compartment, unscrew the 3 upper strut mount retaining nuts using a ratchet, an extender, and an 18mm socket. You can now extract the strut. Using a multi-bit screwdriver and a 10mm socket, unscrew the 4 bolts holding the lower engine splash shield to the side of the lower control arm you want to replace. Tilt it to facilitate subsequent operations. You must now remove the CV axle. The components to be removed are very often seized up, so don't hesitate to brush and to use penetrating oil to make removal easier. Using a ratchet and a 15mm socket, unscrew the 6 CV axle retaining bolts. Don't hesitate to rotate it for easier access. Remove the CV axle from the stub shaft. Then pull the CV axle out completely. Put the upper ball joint back in the wheel knuckle. Loosely screw the nut back on and hold it together. Using a 15mm wrench, a ratchet, an extender, and a 15mm socket, unscrew the upper ball joint retaining nut on the sway bar end link. Remove the upper nut and the bushing. Remove the link. Then remove the spacer. Brush the bolt holding the lower ball joint, then spray it with penetrating oil. Using a 24mm wrench, unscrew the nut from the lower ball joint. Block the rotation with an 8mm Allen key. Be patient. This is a long and tedious operation. With a hammer, strike on the part of the control arm where the lower ball joint is inserted to loosen the assembly. You can also use a jack stand to press on the nut. Then tap on the wheel knuckle. The ball joint should come out of the knuckle. Finish unscrewing the nut. Brush the lower control arm retaining nuts and spray them with penetrating oil. Next, using a ratchet, an 18mm socket, and a 24mm wrench, unscrew the control arm retaining nuts. Using a ratchet and a 10mm socket, unscrew the 2 sway bar bracket retaining bolts. Then, remove the metal bracket. Remove the bushing to shift the sway bar. Remove the lower control arm retaining bolts. You can now remove the lower control arm by pulling it towards you and moving it back and forth. Disengage the rear part of the control arm by prying it with the crowbar. For great content, our best price, and fast shipping, download the CarParts.com app now. Brush and grease the control arm area to facilitate its installation. Using a piece of fine sandpaper, scrub the knuckle of the wheel knuckle, then apply silicone grease to the flat part that will be in contact with the lower control arm ball joint sleeve. You can order the lower control arm used in the video on CarParts.com via the link in the description. Take the control arm. Start by temporarily replacing the control arm ball joint in its knuckle. Put the control arm back in its slots. If necessary, tap with a hammer or pry with a crowbar to facilitate handling. Replace the bolts. You can use a plastic mallet. Put the washers in place. Then screw the nuts back on by hand at first. You can then screw the nuts back in using a ratchet until they make contact. Screw the lower ball joint retaining bolt back onto the wheel knuckle until it makes contact. Put the sway bar bushing back in place. Then screw the retaining metal bracket back on. Finish tightening using a torque wrench. Take the sway bar end link, install it in the lower control arm. Then install the spacer. Put the upper bushing in place. Loosely screw the nut back on to hold it together. Remove the upper control arm ball joint from the wheel knuckle. You can attach the wheel knuckle to the upper control arm using a clamp or wire to avoid damaging the brake hose. Clean the stub shaft with fine sandpaper, brake cleaner, and a paper towel. Take the CV axle. Apply assembly grease to facilitate the installation. Start by installing the CV axle in the wheel knuckle. Put the CV axle back onto the stub shaft. Loosely screw the two bolts back on to hold it together. Then use a jack to lift the wheel knuckle so as to screw the CV axle retaining bolts back on. Start screwing by hand, then with a socket wrench. Finish tightening using a torque wrench. Roughly put the hub nut back in place. Remove the jack. Cut the wheel knuckle clamp. Now you need to reinstall the strut. Pass the strut through the upper control arm, then install the upper part first. Then move the strut foot closer to its slot. Loosely screw a nut back on to hold it together. Using the jack, lift the wheel knuckle assembly so as to put the strut foot back in place. Screw the two lower retaining bolts back in until they make contact. Remove the jack. Reinsert the upper control arm ball joint into the wheel knuckle. You will need to pry it out with a big flathead screwdriver or a small crowbar. Then screw the nut back on by hand. You can now complete the tightening of the lower control arm ball joint with a torque wrench. Using the jack, lift the wheel knuckle assembly so as to screw the upper control arm ball joint back on correctly. Finish tightening using a torque wrench. Screw the strut foot retaining bolts and nuts back on until they make contact. Finish tightening using a torque wrench. During this operation, you will be intervening on the front axle of your car, so it is advisable to perform a wheel alignment afterwards. Then reattach the clips. You can now finish tightening the lower control arm with a torque wrench. Screw the sway bar end link back on until it makes contact. Finish tightening using a torque wrench. Remove the jack. Screw the brake hose mounting bracket back on. Replace the ABS sensor cable and clip it back into its slots. Plug the electrical connector back in. And lock it. Reconnect the electrical connection. Screw the hub nut back on until it makes contact. Insert a flathead screwdriver thin enough to fit between the two walls of the disc. It must be inserted before the caliper mount so that it can abut against it. Finish tightening the hub nut with a torque wrench. Put the splash shield back in place and screw it back on. Then you will be able to put the wheels back on your vehicle. Put your truck back on the ground before properly fixing the wheels in place. Operation complete.